Hey guys, welcome back to Pretentious Cinephile 1982. Check us out on the blog, just launched pretentiouscinephile1982.blogspot.com. Just started the YouTube. Just type in Pretentious Cinephile 1982 and check out our Pinterest, pinterest.com/Pretentious Cinephile 1982. We got a whole bunch of IMAX film cells, a lot of posters, a lot of movie memorabilia, so check us out. It's going to be a bright, uplifting episode today, guys. Very heartwarming episode. We're talking about Monster, the Ed Gein story. Not exactly Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I know. Series just dropped last week around October 3rd on Netflix, all 8 episodes, created by, I believe, Ryan Murphy. I think he's just a producer this time, completely showrun by Ian Brennan, who co-wrote the entire series, starting with Dahmer. With that being said, spoiler warning for the entire season of Monster, the Ed Gein story. According to Ian Brennan, co-creator, showrunner, and head writer of the Monster anthology series, our culture has been fucked since post-World War II in terms of our fetish and obsession with serial killers, making way for serial killer fandom. Enter Ed Gein from the mid-1940s to 1950s in Middle America, Wisconsin. According to Brennan, the catalyst for Hitchcock's Psycho, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Thomas Harris's Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and even David Fincher and Joe Penhall's Mindhunter for good measure, and also the catalyst for our fucked up serial killer culture. Thanks, Ed. So, I was a huge fan of the first season of Monster. In 2022, Dahmer, which I found equally engrossing and terrifying. I remember the backlash of social media decrying how the creators were exploiting the crimes and victims' families for financial gain, and I can empathize with that. But I also retorted at the time that people shouldn't be blaming the creators, that they are just capitalizing off of a cultural trend, and if anything, people should be blaming the culture, and why there was and still is a huge demand for true crime and serial killer content. It's true, if it wasn't them, it'd be somebody else. So, they're just a messenger. Don't shoot the messenger, right? Then there was Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, season 2, I guess, of the anthology series, which wasn't as terrifying, but more of a social commentary on privilege and the media circus that surrounds these current affair type stories. It reminded me more of American Crime Story, the first O.J. Simpson season, and the politics of perception, race, and privilege when it comes to celebrity types and their quote-unquote unfair trials. Mild spoilers for season 2 of Monster, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, but I thought it was genius in showing us the brothers' perspective and story for 8+ episodes. Then in the final scene of the final episode, show us the quote-unquote objective truth of it all and have us question their quote-unquote father's sexual abuse stories. In Monster, the Ed Gein story, the latest season, we get a more circular meta aspect of, quote, who's the real monster, end quote, with both the viewers and society at large included. According to the Tudum article, quote, this whole series, it turns the camera right on us, end quote, Brennan tells Tudum. And that's the genius aspect of this season that I personally adored, but I can see how it may confound many viewers. Many on Reddit have ripped it to shreds, with many threads denouncing, quote, what the hell did they do to the Ed Gein story, end quote, or, quote, does anyone like the Ed Gein series, end quote, or, quote, Ed Gein series felt insulting and narcissistic, end quote. I feel, this is me talking now, I feel like this approach of turning the camera on ourselves can be challenging and will be met with much disapproval or misunderstanding, but all's fair in collective audience Rotten Tomatoes scores and criticisms. I personally have been asking this question since season 2, the question of, turning the camera on ourselves and the culture as a whole. So I'm glad the creators finally came around to addressing it. While I find the structure of the film productions of Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs stories bleeding into the overall narrative to be pretty brilliant, it felt a bit uneven running time-wise. Meaning, we spent too much time with Alfred Hitchcock and Anthony Perkins, just the right time with Tobe Hooper and Leatherface, and too little time with Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs. Just enough time with the Mindhunter duo, though, and it made me miss Mindhunter so much. Thanks a lot. Also could be hinting that, Mindhunter may be coming back. There's huge demand for it. The problem I think general audiences had was the straightforward way it approached the Ed Gein narrative. Having timestamps and presenting the events in a dramatic approach misinformed the perception that this was a standard true crime biopic. I've read a lot of Redditors pointing out the many embellishments, straight up lies, and creative liberties the creators have taken, but they've been doing this since the O.J. Simpson story, adding said liberties for a dramatic effect. I get why storytellers have to do this, and I think it makes sense to condense and add complete falsehoods, to fill in thematic concepts, and to make the story more economic and cohesive. For instance, the storyline that Ed Gein helped the FBI BSU Behavioral Science Unit to catch Ted Bundy may be a complete fabrication, as, there's no evidence he did such a thing, and I believe they reported his interview was crazy and incoherent, was a thematic decision to dovetail Ed Gein's effect on popular culture, ending it with actual serial killers that idolized him with the Mindhunter framing device was just icing on the cake. What kind of terrifies me is the Reddit detectives who know the Ed Gein narrative down to the most minuscule detail and are offended that they got it wrong. If you want to know the true story, read his biography or watch his documentary, which, is still not end-to-end truth, mind you, but still told with an agenda by those writers and creators. What else could Ian Brennan and company have done besides give a disclaimer based on the dramatization? Perhaps they could have made it into a more cartoonish, zany satire like Natural Born Killers, which, strangely enough, had a similar message of the media we consume is very powerful and inspires us to do crazy things. My point is, sometimes more subdued and self-reflexive satire like this Ed Gein show will go over people's heads. Towards the end of the series, in about episode 7, we get the bomb dropped on us as the psychiatrist gives Ed the diagnosis that he has schizophrenia. This explains why he has never tried for his crimes by reasons of insanity, and also a literal explanation for the myriad of fantasies we've witnessed throughout the series. From him taking women out on fantastical dates, including his sort of best friend and confidant Adeline Watkins, to older women and shopkeeper Bernice, with whom it is portrayed they were having a sexual affair, right down to his masturbatory fantasies of Ilsa Koch, and to his ambiguous killing of babysitter Evelyn, it is clear that Ed Gein is an unreliable narrator and we can't trust what we see when it is presented through his perspective. According to history, there is evidence that Gein murdered only 2 victims, Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden, but his quote-unquote hoarded artifacts were notoriously disturbing and included but not limited to human bones and fragments, furniture made of human skin, human face masks, corsets, bowls made out of skulls, and 9 vulvas. The butcher/ghoul of Plainfield indeed. The question I kept asking throughout the series was, is Adeline real? There are many fantastical elements about her scenes infused with realistic elements. Like, they probably went out with each other on dates, to the roller rink and to the diner and what have you, but how much was the romantic element embellished by Ed Gein's schizo-psyche? The creators made a point to show us that Adeline in the show was also weirdly drawn to and curious about macabre imagery and events, but to what extent? When she comes over to Ed's house, she abhors the detestable stench and the trash around the kitchen and all over the house, but she doesn't question the human skull bowls or human skin chairs. At one point we see Ed Gein dressed up in one of his human suits and stab her repeatedly in the shower, just like that scene in Psycho. And that was clearly fantasy as we see her alive later, but what was the reason for that scene? Was it just for that visual match cut for Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh in the Psycho reenactment scene? There was an entire episode where we see the domestic life of Adeline at home and that terrible scene where her mother admits she tried everything in her power to miscarry, and that is the reason why Adeline is so quote-unquote off. And Adeline absconds to New York for an interview to be an assistant of a famous photographer, Ouija I believe his name was, played by Elliot Gould. Adeline is different and craves attention and stardom, but doesn't have the talent or drive or the work ethic. She ends up back in Plainfield with Ed. When Ed is ultimately captured by authorities after the death of Bernice, Adeline is as giddy as a schoolgirl to step in front of the camera and answer questions, although she denies having a romantic relationship and infers just the months-long acquaintanceship. It is left vague whether this is actual truth or a deliberate omission of truth to avoid self-incrimination. She finally gets her spotlight in the end, I guess, although we never see of her again until later. I'll come back to that. My question is, Were those scenes in episode 7 her actual perspective, or was that Ed's? How could he assume her entire persona without being present in the same room as her? I don't get the dynamics of that. They didn't really explain that well. I wish there was a clear distinction between those scenes, but alas, it is left ambiguous. In the end, when Ed is in his last days stricken with lung cancer, he gets a visitor. It is Adeline, ageless, looking in her 20s, as Ed is in his late 70s in the Mendota mental institution. He confesses how alone he's been and how he's just needed a friend all these years, decades even. She admits her mutual morbid fascination with the macabre and says she won't hide it anymore and will carry them out finally. What does that mean? She gonna start killing for him, right? We don't know what she means by that. If we are to believe she is a figment of his imagination or loneliness, in this moment, which her ageless presentation would suggest, what does she represent? Is it us? The viewers? Society as a whole? Other like-minded, morbidly fascinated? We've seen Ed extremely impressionable, seeing Holocaust images and carrying them out in his twisted artifacts. The ultimate resulting conclusion can be that after 8 episodes of this show, we will carry out his actions in a similar way. If that's the case, brah fucking vo. I love that ending and I love that interpretation. It may have taken many articles, angry Reddit comments, and many of my own cathartic paragraph writing to get to that conclusion, but that's pretty damn genius, if not a completely damning assumption and prediction of what our human nature is as a whole. Let's just not prove them right, okay? So what do I think of this season as a whole? Right now, I'm a bit torn and as unreliable a narrator as Ed Gein. It's still fresh in my mind. I just finished the last episode last night, but the one thing I'll give it is that it made me think of it for a while, a whole day. Just kidding, I've been thinking about it for a while though, throughout the days, throughout the series. So not only the events of Ed Gein's life and his disturbing actions, but the structure and form of turning the camera on us, the viewers, and of society in general. It's head-shaking to think of how far we've come or how low we've sunk as a culture, but it's amazing that the show forces us to that conclusion. As a social commentary, it may be a bit too heady and complex for true crime aficionados and too frustratingly self-indulgent for horror fans, but for pretentious cinephiles like myself who love meta commentaries and heady, weighty content, it may be too gruesome and disturbing in terms of imagery and mood even. I had to watch the early episodes with the lights on and, watch a comedy or sitcom right after, and I still had nightmares, Jesus. Rewatchability is a huge factor for me in the long run, and I don't think I have the gall to watch it again, unfortunately, but that's just me. I love what the show is saying, and I'll follow Ian Brennan anywhere now after the work he's done on this series, so that's something to say at the very least. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, maybe true crime or horror aficionados, and even then maybe not for them. And that's where I'm still conflicted, who is this show for? We'll see in a few years or a decade's time perhaps. I would recommend it to anyone curious about the origins of Ed Gein, just to it's more of in the structure of a true crime presented factoid. It is more about the legend of Ed Gein, more about all of the stories that people have embellished. Let's face it, whatever true story we have, even if it's our life, we're embellishing, right? It's how we make a good story. It's how we tell a good story. You go to a cocktail party, you're not just going to present it matter-of-factly. You're going to spice things up for dramatic effect, right? So time will tell how well this will age, but it's got me thinking, that's for sure. So with that being said, that is my thoughts on Monster, the Ed Gein story, Season 3 of the anthology series of Monster. I recommend the show. It's great for this time of year, Halloween. But that's going to do it for us here for this episode of Pretentious Cinephile 1982. If you want the transcription of this episode, I have it in writing on the blog, so check us out on pretentiouscinephile1982.blogspot.com. With that being said, be good, everyone. Don't try this at home. The events of this show, anyway. For your sake and for society's sake, be good. Have a good night. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys. In a garden of freedom, don't you know that I'm loved?